Imagine being 16 years old, accused of stealing a backpack. You're innocent, but you can't afford the $3,000 bail, so you're sent to Rikers Island to wait for your trial. Days turn into weeks. Weeks turn into months. Months turn into years. You spend 800 days in solitary confinement alone in a 6-by-8-foot cell for 23 hours a day. Guards beat you. Other inmates attack you. You try to kill yourself twice. After 3 years, the charges are dropped. They let you go at no trial. No conviction, not just a sorry. 2 years later, you hang yourself. You're 22 years old. This happened to Kalief Browder. And his story is not unique. Welcome to Rikers Island, a 413-acre island in New York City's East River that holds one of the world's largest jail complexes. It's not technically a prison. It's a jail, which means most people haven't even been convicted of a crime. They're just waiting for trial. But Rikers has become synonymous with violence, abuse, neglect, and death. In 2024 alone, 14 people died in custody. In the 3 years from 2022 to 2024, at least 33 people died there. This is the place that's supposed to be closed by 2027. But as of 2025, it's gotten worse, not better. Violence is up. Deaths are up, and a federal judge just stripped New York City of control, saying the city has proven it cannot stop the brutality. This is the story of America's deadliest jail, and how a broken system destroys lives every single day. To understand the horror of Rikers Island, you first need to understand what it is. Rikers Island sits in the East River between Queens and the Bronx. It's 413 acres, roughly the size of 280 football fields. The island is connected to Queens by a single bridge, and that's the only way in or out. The jail complex opened in 1932, built to replace the deteriorating facilities on what was then called Blackwell's Island, now known as Roosevelt Island, from the very beginning. Rikers was designed to be massive, a centralized holding facility for everyone arrested in New York. City who couldn't make bail. Today, Rikers consists of 10 separate jail facilities, including the Robert N. DeVoren Center for Young Adults, the Anna M. Cross Center, the George R. Virno Center, the Otis Bantam Correctional Center, and others at its peak in the 1990s. Rikers held over 20,000 people. Today, it holds around 6,000 to 7,000 on any given day. But here's the critical detail. 86% of the people on Rikers Island are legally innocent. They're awaiting trial. They haven't been convicted of anything. They're there for one reason. They can't afford bail. In 2021, the New York City Comptroller calculated that it costs $556,539 to detain one person for 1 year. At Rikers, that's more than $500,000 per person. More recently, that number has climbed to around $450,000 per person, a 200% increase from 2013. The jail is staffed by about 9,000 civilian correction officers and 1,500 other civilians. It processes about 100,000 admissions per year, though many of those are the same people cycling in and out multiple times. And here's what's happening inside: rampant violence, medical neglect, mental health crises, crumbling infrastructure, and death. Lots of death. Let me give you the numbers, because they're staggering. In 2015, there were 9,424 assaults at Rikers, the highest number in 5 years. That's 26 assaults every single day. By 2024, violence had only gotten worse. The federal monitor overseeing Rikers, yes, Rikers has been under federal oversight since 2015, reported that rates of violence among people in custody, violence by staff against detainees, and violence against staff by detainees were all up by astronomical levels. Let me break that down. Inmate-on-inmate violence, stabbings, slashings, beatings. Weapons are fashioned from the crumbling infrastructure, broken pieces of concrete, metal from deteriorating walls, sharpened plastic, in facilities where bugs and vermin are rampant, where blood, urine, and feces cover floors. Violence is a daily reality. Staff on inmate violence. In 2014, the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York issued a damning report condemning the systematic abuse and violation of prisoners' constitutional rights. Guards were found to be acquiescing to or even encouraging violence among inmates. Beatings by correction officers were routine. Use of force incidents, pepper spray, physical restraint, head strikes skyrocketed. Inmate town staff violence in 2023 and 2024. Assaults on staff increased significantly. Correction officers faced broken jaws, broken orbital bones, broken noses. The job became so dangerous that officers began going aid, oil in large numbers, contributing to severe understaffing that made conditions even worse. And then there's the issue of sexual violence. In 2024, the Department of Correction was sued for failing to protect transgender inmates, who were being housed in dangerous male units where they faced egregious forms of physical and sexual violence according to internally males and dozens of interviews, the most horrifying aspect. Despite countless documented cases of abuse, very few correction officers have ever been prosecuted or even removed from their positions. Here's a specific example. In 2009, the New York Times reported on a pattern of cases showing that city correctional officials have been aware of a problem in which Rikers guards have acquiesced or encouraged violence among inmates. At least 7 lawsuits were filed in federal court accusing guards of complicity in inmate violence. In the 3 that were settled, the city admitted no liability or wrongdoing. No liability, no wrongdoing, just payouts and business as usual. Now let's talk about the deaths, because this is where Rikers Island's failure becomes undeniable. In 2022, 19 people died in New York City jails, the highest number since 2013. In 2023, at least 9 people died. In 2024, 5 people died. And as of late 2025, at least 14 people have died, nearly tripling the previous year's total. Let me tell you about some of them. Curtis Davis, 44, was found unresponsive in his cell on July 23, 2023, and pronounced dead shortly after. The correction officer assigned to his housing unit was suspended for allegedly signing off on a visit without actually touring the unit. Translation: the officer lied about doing their job, and Curtis Davis died. Donnie Ubera, 33, was found unresponsive in a mental observation unit and later pronounced dead. Manish Kanwar, 27, died of a suspected drug overdose on October 5, 2023. The officer responsible for checking his cell failed to make required rounds over 3 pre-dawn hours before Kanwar was found. Chima Williams, 43, collapsed on January 4, 2024, after playing basketball. He went into cardiac arrest. Despite being given an anti-overdose drug and CPR, he couldn't be revived. Charisma Jones, 23, died in DOC custody at Elmhurst Hospital on July 14th, 2024. Her lawyers claimed jail staff repeatedly ignored her requests for medical help, leading to a medical episode that caused her death. After her death, investigations revealed that correction officers allegedly blocked medical staff from helping her. Anthony Jordan, 63, died at Mount Sinai Hospital, Queens on August 20, 2024. He was rushed to the hospital during a medical emergency and pronounced dead shortly after arrival. Ramal Powell, 37, died in Otis Bantam Correctional Center on February 19, 2025. Powell had been held in city custody for the last 19 months of his life on a parole violation. His death is being investigated as a possible overdose. Aramis First, 32, died on December 7, 2025. An officer said he appeared unwell in his cell around 2 a.m. He was taken to Mount Sinai Queens Hospital and pronounced dead at 3:15 a.m. His family said the Department of Correction didn't even have the decency to inform them of his transportation to the hospital. These aren't just statistics. These are people. Fathers, sons, brothers, daughters. And most of them were never convicted of any crime. They died waiting for justice. But to truly understand Rikers Island, you need to know Kalief Browder's story, because his case became the symbol of everything wrong with this system. On May 15, 2010, Kalief Browder was 16 years old. He was walking home from a party in the Bronx with a friend when police stopped him. A man named Roberto Batista had called the police, claiming that 2 weeks earlier, someone had stolen his backpack containing $700 in cash, a camera, an iPod Touch, and a credit card. Bautista pointed at Kalief and his friend. Kalief insisted he was innocent. He'd never seen this man before. He hadn't stolen anything. But it didn't matter. Kalief was arrested and charged with second-degree robbery. His bail was set at $3,000. His family couldn't afford it. So Kalief Browder, a 16-year-old kid who enjoyed playing Pokemon and watching wrestling, was sent to Rikers Island to await trial. He would spend the next 3 years there. 3 years for allegedly stealing a backpack. Without ever being convicted, Kalief was sent to the Robert and Devoren Center, an all-male facility that housed young adults ages 16 to 18. It was one of nearly 600 housed in the unit. A U.S. attorney later noted the jail had a deep-seated culture of violence. Injuries included broken jaws, broken orbital bones, broken noses. Kalief was beaten by other inmates. He was assaulted by guards multiple times. He told his mother during weekend visits about the horrors he faced, the constant fear, the violence, the degradation. But the worst part? Kalief spent approximately 800 days, more than 2 years, in solitary confinement. Solitary confinement at Rikers means spending 23 hours a day in a 6-by-8-foot cell. 1 hour of recreation in a slightly larger cage. No meaningful human contact. No sunlight. No stimulation. Just you and four walls for months on end. For a teenage brain that's still developing, the psychological effects are devastating. Research shows prolonged isolation contributes to increased anxiety, paranoia, hallucinations, depression, and suicidal thoughts. Kalief attempted suicide twice while in Rikers. Meanwhile, his case kept getting delayed. Prosecutors repeatedly asked for postponements over 30 court dates in 3 years. The key witness, Roberto Bautista, had returned to Mexico and wouldn't come back to testify, but no one advocated for Kalief's release. No one said, maybe we shouldn't keep this kid locked up for 3 years without a trial. Instead, prosecutors repeatedly offered Kalief plea deals. Just plead guilty, they said. You'll get time served and go home today. But Kalief refused. He was innocent. He hadn't stolen anything. And he believed naively, tragically, that if he just maintained his innocence, the truth would set him free. He didn't understand that the system doesn't care about innocence. It cares about efficiency. It cares about conviction rates. And when you're poor and black and can't afford bail, innocence means nothing. Finally, in May 2013, after Kalief had been locked up for nearly 3 years, prosecutors dropped the case. The charges were dismissed. No trial. No conviction. No apology. Kalief walked out of Rikers on May 29, 2013. He was 20 years old. He'd gone in at 16. He tried to rebuild his life. He earned his GED. He enrolled in Bronx Community College. He gave interviews about his experience, hoping to bring attention to the injustices of Rikers. In October 2014, The New Yorker published a powerful article about his case that went viral. But Kalief was broken. The trauma of Rikers had left him with PTSD, depression, and paranoia. He had flashbacks. He stopped enjoying things he used to love: video games, basketball, spending time with friends. He mostly stayed in his room with the door closed. He attempted suicide more times after his release. On June 6, 2015, 2 years after walking out of Rikers, Kalief Browder hanged himself from an air conditioning unit outside his bedroom window. He was 22 years old, physically. He was here. His mother, Venita, told the Marshall Project, but mentally, he was still in Rikers. Kalief Browder's story sparked national outrage. It led to documentaries, including a 6-part series produced by Jay-Z. It inspired protests and calls for reform. In 2019, New York City settled a lawsuit with the Browder family for $3.3 million. But here's the thing. No one was held accountable. No correction officer. No prosecutor. No judge. No one. The system that killed Kalief Browder is still operating today. And it's killing more people. So how did Rikers get this bad? And why hasn't it been fixed? The problems are systemic and interconnected. Problem number 1. Pretrial detention and bail. 86% of people on Rikers are there because they can't afford bail. They're legally innocent, but poverty keeps them locked up. This creates a perverse incentive. If you're poor and maintain your innocence, you stay in jail for months or years waiting for trial. If you're poor and plead guilty even if you didn't do it, you get out faster. This is called the trial tax, and it's why so many innocent people plead guilty. Problem number 2, lengthy case processing. In the late 1990s, the average length of stay at Rikers was about 50 days. By 2024, it had more than doubled to over 100 days. People facing felony charges were held for an average of 125 days in 2023, compared to 69 days in 2000. Why court backlogs? Prosecutor delays. Overworked public defenders. A system overwhelmed by volume. COVID-19 made it worse, effectively shutting down courts for months. Even now, in 2025, case processing times remain stubbornly high. The longer people stay, the more violent Rikers becomes. Despair breeds violence. Problem number 3, mental health crisis in May 2023. The number of individuals with serious mental illness at Rikers reached a 3-year peak, 1,207. People, or 20% of the jail population. These are people who need psychiatric care, not incarceration. But instead of treatment, they get solitary confinement, which makes their conditions worse. Problem number 4, staffing and accountability. Correction officers at Rikers are overwhelmed, undertrained, and often complicit in the violence. The Federal Monitor has repeatedly criticized the concentric circles of dysfunction where staff don't do their jobs, falsify records, and face no consequences. In 2021, officers began going aid to oil in massive numbers, essentially an open revolt. Staffing shortages meant fewer guards to supervise more inmates, which led to more violence, which led to more officers calling out sick, which created a vicious cycle. And the Correction Officers Union? They've been an obstacle to reform. Fighting against oversight and accountability measures. Problem number 5, physical infrastructure. The buildings on Rikers are literally crumbling. Pipes leak, walls crack, vermin infest the facilities. There's inadequate heat in winter and not enough air conditioning in summer. The deteriorating infrastructure provides materials for weapons, broken concrete, metal fragments. Sharp plastic. Photos that have circulated online show men sleeping on filthy floors covered in blood, urine, and feces. Dozens of men crammed into cells designed for far fewer, non-functioning toilets, chipping walls covered in dirt and grime. These aren't just unpleasant conditions, they're inhumane. Problem number 6, federal oversight has failed. In 2015, New York City entered into a federal consent decree, a legal agreement overseen by a federal judge aimed at reducing violence and abuse at Rikers. The decree appointed an independent monitor to track progress, but nearly 10 years later, the monitor's reports tell a grim story. In his 18th report in November 2024, Monitor Steve Martin wrote that the department remains mired in dysfunction and reform is advancing at a glacial pace. In 2023, federal prosecutors and the Legal Aid Society asked Judge Laura Taylor Swain to hold the city in contempt for failing to meet the requirements of the consent decree. In November 2024, Judge Swain ruled in their favor. In a scathing 65-page contempt order, she wrote that the current rates of use of force stabbings and slashings, fights, assaults on staff, and in custody deaths remain extraordinarily high, and there has been no substantial reduction in the risk of harm. She held New York City in contempt of court and indicated she was inclined to appoint a federal receiver, essentially taking control of Rikers away from the city entirely. 3 mayors, 5 correction commissioners, nearly a decade of federal oversight, and conditions are worse than ever. So what happens next? In October 2019, the New York City Council voted to close Rikers Island by 2027. The plan was to replace it with smaller, borough-based jails in the Bronx, Queens, Brooklyn, and Manhattan facilities designed to be more humane, more accessible to families, and easier to manage. But as of 2025, that timeline has slipped. Construction contracts have been delayed. community opposition has slowed progress, and most importantly, the jail population hasn't decreased enough to make the closure feasible. The new facilities are designed to hold a maximum of 3,300 people combined, but as of 2025, Rikers still holds around 6,000 to 7,000 people. Unless the city dramatically reduces the number of people in jail through bail reform, faster case processing, and alternatives to incarceration, there simply isn't enough space in the new jails. Current projections place completion of the borough-based jails in 2031, 4 years after the legally mandated deadline, and possibly as late as 2032. Meanwhile, a federal receiver may soon be appointed. In January 2025, Judge Swain ordered the city and lawyers representing incarcerated people to present a plan for receivership if implemented. This would mean a court-appointed individual would take over as chief executive of Rikers. They would have powers broader than the correction commissioner. They would operate without political interference. They would remain in place until conditions substantially improve. Some experts believe a receiver is the only way to force real change. Sarah Norman, who helped oversee mental health facilities in California's prison system under receivership, argues that a receiver can operate without fear or favor and focus solely on improving conditions. Others worry that receivership is an admission of government failure, that if the city can't run its own jails, what does that say about its ability to govern? Either way, one thing is clear: the status quo is unacceptable. People are dying. Violence is rampant. The system is broken. And until something fundamental changes, Rikers Island will continue to be a place where justice goes to die. Here's what you need to understand about Rikers Island. It's not an anomaly. It's not an exception. It's a feature of the American criminal justice system. Rikers exists because we've decided as a society that people who are accused of crimes, not convicted, just accused, should be locked up if they can't afford bail. We've decided that pretrial detention is acceptable, even when it destroys lives. We've decided that jails can be violent, filthy, and inhumane, as long as the people suffering inside them are poor, black, brown, and voiceless. Kalief Browder should be alive today. He'd be 31 years old. Maybe he'd have graduated college. Maybe he'd have a family. Maybe he'd be working, contributing to his community, living the life that was stolen from him. Instead, he's a symbol. A reminder of what happens when we confuse punishment with justice, when we prioritize efficiency over humanity, when we forget that the people in our jails are people. More than 100 people have died on Rikers Island in the past decade. Hundreds of thousands have passed through its cells. Most were never convicted of anything. They were just too poor to buy their freedom. Rikers Island is scheduled to close. But even if the buildings come down, the system that created Rikers, the system of cash bail, overcrowded courts, pretrial detention, and dehumanization, that system will remain unless we change it. Kalief Browder's mother, Vanita, became an activist after her son's death, fighting for jail reform until her own death in 2016. Before she died, she said, "My son didn't die in vain. He changed the world." She was right. Kalief's story sparked reforms, bail reform, an end to solitary confinement for young people in some jurisdictions, and the commitment to close Rikers. But the work isn't done, not even close. As long as Rikers Island stands, as long as people die waiting for justice, as long as poverty determines who goes to jail and who goes free, Kalief Browder's fight continues. It's up to all of us to finish it. If you love this story, comment, and subscribe. This will encourage me to bring you more stories like this.